The third one is Professor Annie Sheba from WMU. Mr. Takem will deal with maritime safety, IMSA's perspective, and the professor will be the panelist for domestic ship safety. And the last one is Dr. Richard Latte, Deputy Director in charge of planning and monitoring and evaluation of Ghana Maritime Authority. Distinguished participants, the importance of having maritime safety goes without, cannot be overstated. We all need our waters to be safe so as to ensure the shipping works properly, effectively, and with cost effective. I don't want to delay. I would like to invite the first panelist, who is Gisela, to start with the theme of maritime security. You are welcome.
Thank you, Stella. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the hosts and the organizers of the conference. It's a pleasure to be here. As a way of introduction, Stella said, my name is Gisela Vieira. I'm the acting head of maritime security at IMO. And I'm pretty sure you know a lot about IMO, but I wanted to focus the presentation of what IMO do when it comes to maritime security. So the way, and I'm not really sure how long I have, but I'm going to try to cover everything in a brief space of time. But if I do go a bit over time, please give me a shout. I'm going to split the presentation in three aspects of the role of the maritime security section at IMO. So we cover regulations and guidance. We do reporting and communication, and we also deliver capacity building initiatives. As a quick background, we are working under the Maritime Safety Division, and our work when it comes to regulations, it's largely done through the Maritime Safety Committee. We have a service function. We support member states and the Secretary General. And I'm going to now, again, going through our main roles. So, when it comes to regulations in maritime security scope, our main regulation is SOLAS. You can have just a look of some of our instruments here, and without going through in too much details of each instrument, I would just cover some of the main regulations we have when it comes to maritime security. I'm sure you are all familiar with SOLAS. The chapter that deals with security is Chapter 11.2, which was adopted following the 9/11 incident. So the Chapter 11 was originally dealing only with safety, and it was split in 11.1 for safety, 11.2 for security. SOLAS is one of the most important treaties related to the safety of commercial ships. And the first version was adopted in 1914 in response to the Titanic disaster. And as I said, after the 9/11 incidents, the IMO had to respond to the threats, to growing threats to maritime security, and that's when the Chapter 11.2 was adopted with the special measures to enhance maritime security, and the adoption of the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, known as the ISPS Code. The Chapter 11.2 also adopted things specific for security, like the ship security alert system. I can't really give an overview of everything that this chapter introduced, but one of the things that it's important in terms of practical maritime security regulations is the SSSAS, which includes messages giving the ship's name, identification, call sign, position, and time, date, year, or the location. So this is one of the additions to the SOLAS Chapter 11.2, covering maritime security aspects. We also adopt the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, the ISPS code. I imagine many of you have already heard about that, but just to give a brief overview, the code is split in two parts. Part one is the mandatory part, which has requirements that are related to maritime and port security, that all SOLAS contracting governments must adhere to in order to comply with the code. Part B, it's recommendatory, and it provides guidelines on how to fulfill the requirements on Part A. The main objectives of the ISPS code is first to establish an international framework that promotes cooperation among the contracting governments of SOLAS and all stakeholders in assessments, detection of potential threats, protection of ships and port facilities that are used for the international trade in order to implement preventive protection measures against threats. The code also determines roles and responsibilities to all the stakeholders involving in maritime security, in safeguarding maritime security in ports and ships, national, regional, and international level. It also ensures efficient collection and exchange of information related to security at all levels, and it provides a methodology for ship and port security assessment, and this is one of the key areas of the code because it's a very broad scoping when it comes to maritime security threats. So you have guidance and requirements on how to develop assessments and then develop plans in each port facility and from the ship side, because the code covers both the port facility and the ship side. And finally, it ensures that all measures are appropriate and proportionate. So this is just an overview of the main objectives of the code. We have also developed a guide to maritime security and the ISPS code, mainly because there has been several instruments, guidelines, recommendations, and member states felt that there was a need to compile everything in one single place for easy reference. So we first developed the guide in 2011, and we have revised. This is the one you are seeing on screen is the version that we adopted in 2021, covering also new threats like all the cybersecurity and the guidelines that the Maritime Safety Committee has adopted. And why do we need all this? There's a lot of regulations, instruments, and codes. Why do we need all this? These are just some of the threats that we are currently facing. it's on a not exhaustive list, but we could mention threats for like IUU phishing, irregular human migration, stowaways, piracy and armed robbery, maritime terrorism, weapons and narcotics smuggling, cybersecurity, offshore energy platforms, including wind farms, undersea cables, thefts from heritage of shipwrecks, and illegal wildlife trade. So this is just a few of the threats that we are facing currently, and that's justify the need to have regulations that member states can adhere in order to ensure a global or secure shipping. So this is, when it comes to regulation, the second part that I mentioned that it's under our role is the reporting and communication. So this is a print screen of our global integrated shipping information system. This is where we interact with member states in several areas under the scope of IMO. Specifically for maritime security, we have two modules, one on maritime security and one on piracy. The maritime security model is the one that it's used by the SOLAS contracting parties to fulfill their requirements under the convention. So basically, contracting parties needs to inform the organization regarding port facilities, security plans, and focal points, and everything that is under the convention when it comes to the requirements to fulfill the special measures to enhance maritime security. The other model that we have is on piracy and armed robbery. This is a database that we collect information and report to member states on the incidents of piracy all over the world. This is not used for operational purpose. It's mainly for our own statistic trends, and we receive data from different information sharing centers, also from the member states. We rely on the member states to report so we can provide accurate information to the whole membership. So this is the part of our role as the Secretary for Maritime Security. The biggest one is the final role that we have is on the capacity building side. And then just going to go through a brief overview of what we are covering in our capacity building initiatives when it comes to maritime security. We have a global maritime security program that was launched in 2002, which is managed by the Maritime Security Section. We have different funding sources that comes from the International Maritime Security Trust Fund, which is a multi-donor trust fund. We also have some allocation of the IMO Technical Cooperation Program, and we also work with bilateral contributions from member states. The global program has gone through a transition. The early focus was the basic implementation of SOLAS, Chapter 11.2 and the ISPS code, early 2000, year 2000. Then we expanded to include long-range identification and tracking and development of implementation of LRIT. So we were talking about 2007, 2009. And then after 2010, the focus was more on the development of the guide for maritime security and the ISPS code, and making sure that all the guidelines and instruments were put in one single place. The current focus is more on an enhanced implementation of the ISPS code, which includes risk and self-assessment, drills and exercises, oversight, governance, whole-of-government approach, which I'm going to mention later what exactly we are working with that, development of ports and maritime security committees, national maritime security assessments, situation awareness, information centers. So this is the focus of the program now, because we've been evolving with the new challenges and the new threats. when it comes to training, we have a set of model courses. I'm not sure if you're familiar with IMO model courses. So we have a package of training on the model courses only for maritime security, ship and port security. So these are training, standard training workshop that we offer to interest member states. We use the train the trainer approach, so we can ensure that there is sustainability when it comes to creating more knowledge and more experts to provide further assistance. The model course, the way it works is they provide a detailed guide for the member states to develop their own training package in accordance to their needs. So they can take the model courses and tailor to what would be their main priorities. Just an overview of the program, our capacity building assistance. We have initiatives on a strategic level, which is what I'll briefly touch upon, assisting member states with our whole of government training, which include committees, risk register, and strategies. On the operational level, we have maritime domain awareness trainings, but we are also doing everything that is related to not only the domain, but also making sure that the countries have a better understanding of their own territorial waters through the information sharing centers, supporting the information sharing centers. On the existing operational level, it's what I've already mentioned. It's the model courses for ports and ship security. And then we have a new operational level with trainings that we just developed or we are just finalizing, which is basically to complement the training that we have on ISPS code as well. But so these are just a few. We are doing packs and baggage screening. We are working with ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, to develop this insider threat and security culture workshop. And we are also on a planning stage to develop a cybersecurity training, taking into account the guidelines that have been approved by the Maritime Safety Committee. I'm not sure how I am on time, so I'm just going to go very quick in some of the final slides. This is another, this is just to highlight what is the capacity building we are offering in the strategic level and the operational level. On the whole of Gov approach, which has become quite popular with our member states, this is there is a three-phase approach. We work with the countries to establish their National Maritime Security Committee, and then we work for the development of the National Maritime Security Risk Register, and finally, we can provide assistance to member states to develop their strategy.
About 1 minute?
1 minute, okay. So I'm about to finish. I'm just going to go very quick with this slide. I'm very happy to take questions and then have chats offline to give you more details on the capacity building. So this is what I mentioned, the whole of Gov, how we are covering, the maritime domain awareness, how we are delivering the training in that area. And then I was going to go through all the initiatives we have, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to say that we have several programs in different regions in addition to the global program. And we are currently working with our international partners in some areas in the Western Indian Ocean, East Africa. So we've been working with the European Union for 2 projects in the East Africa region, but we also have a project in the Red Sea. We are currently working with Germany for a project in the Gulf of Guinea, and we also have the Djibouti Code. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. We are actually having another meeting here this week, the high-level meeting for the Djibouti Code of Conduct, which the Secretary General was also attending in the opening ceremony. So this is going on now. And we also have some initiatives in the pipeline. We continue to work with our international partners. And finally, we are always working with all the stakeholders. We want to make sure that we have a very collaborative approach and that we are not duplicating efforts. So we work with all the UN agencies and all the other organizations and also the industry to make sure we are being inclusive, because maritime security is a very complex subject, and we need to make sure that all the stakeholders are having their input. So this was very brief. I'm sorry, I could be speaking here for hours, but I know we have a very, very strict agenda. As I said, I'm very happy to chat offline and take any questions and further details. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Gisela. Indeed, Africa region is making significant strides in collaboration with the IMO to ensure safe navigation and sustainable maritime practices. Africa Region Maritime Security Cooperation Initiative focuses on enhancing maritime security across the African continent, implemented through implementation of two important codes. As she said about the Djibouti Code of Conduct, there is also Yaoundé Code of Conduct. Djibouti Code of Conduct, briefly, is primarily addressing piracy and armed robbery against ships, in the Western Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden. The code emphasizes regional cooperation, capacity building, information sharing, and the establishment of national maritime information sharing centers, whereby among the 20 members of DCOC, there are African countries in that DCOC. Coming to Yaoundé Code of Conduct, which was adopted in 2013, this one targeted maritime security threats, just like DCOC. And its establishment of maritime, it promotes regional collaboration and establishment of maritime multinational coordination centers. So as Gisela said, you know that IMO gives way, okay, we need to have a safety maritime, safety navigation, safe of shipping. And with these two codes, Gisela, we believe that Africa will be implementing what IMO is guiding us. With that point, I would like to call Professor Saba, and after the presenters, we will be joined by the panelists and the question. So let us give time for the presenters first so that you can get good use of our time. The time is limited, although there are a lot of presenters who would like to present to you. Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished delegates. It's my honor and pleasure once again to be in front of you to deliver on a very important topic, the very purpose of my being here, the safety of domestic ferries. And with regard to this topic, I will be, of course, discussing the IMO model regulations, but more importantly, transforming them into an AMA plan of action, because I believe this is the very purpose of this conference and assembly. So I have two parts in the presentation. First is to give you an update or an overview of the various initiatives which are being undertaken through the auspices of the IMO. And thereafter, the second part of the presentation will deal with the model regulations and transforming them into a plan of action. As far as the model regulations are concerned, we may be aware, most of us are aware, that they were agreed in 2022 as MSC resolution. So there were several aspects to it. First is the development of the model regulations themselves, and then thereafter to provide guidance on incorporation of these model regulations into domestic law. So domestication is very important, and in fact, my current presentation is an effort towards this activity, developing an online training materials on domestic ferry safety and continuing to provide technical assistance to countries through the organization's integrated technical cooperation program. But if you think of domestic ferry safety, it's not new to the IMO. The initiatives date more than 2 decades ago. So nearly since 2004, the initiatives have been underway. In 2010, there was the first set of regulations. They were called the global regulations. And soon after the guidelines were established as global regulations, there were several workshops in different parts of the world. In Africa alone, there were more than 7 national workshops and more than 8 regional workshops at that point in time. And then in 2022, when we move forward, we have this new model regulations. And since then, there has been several initiatives which have been undertaken by the IMO. And let me flash some of them. This is the structure of the regulations themselves, and we'll see more of it in the details in the future. For shortage of time, I will not dwell in this particular slide. As far as the initiatives were considered, there were several action plans which were adopted consequent to the global regulations. Prominent amongst them was the Manila Action Plan, some of you may be aware, and it was followed up with the Manila amendments to the STCW code. Thereafter, there was the Nanjing Action Plan, there was the Bali Action Plan, there was the Suva Action Plan. And I hope, and it is my sincere belief, that tomorrow there will be the new Dar es Salaam or the AMA Action Plan for safety of domestic ferries. Philippines. So before we come to this project, so apart from these different action plans, there were a couple of short-term missions which were launched through the IMO. And these were the hazard studies or the hazard identification studies which were undertaken through the IMO with the participation of the World Maritime University. The first one was done in the Philippines. That was in 2015. And a couple of years later, in 2018 and 19, we had a similar hazard study for Indonesia. These are 2 big archipelagic countries with several issues and several big incidents. So therefore, these were the focus. And this culminated in the development of the major project, which is called the Formal Safety Assessment Approach to Safety of Domestic Ferries. And this was supported by the World Bank Group and the International Finance Corporation. It was, to my mind, this was, I would say, one of the biggest projects, at least in which the focus was on domestic ferry safety. It lasted more than a year. We interacted and engaged with almost every stakeholder who's engaged with ferries or in the transportation system in the Philippines. So there were workshops, there were on-site meetings with the stakeholders. There were 2 missions from IMO to this particular country. So it is one of the best reports, and I believe Philippines will be very soon launching this through the IMO. It will come up as an IMO document, and it will be available for others. More importantly, this was to be a pilot project to be emulated in other countries, and we'll see how it is happening now. Currently, there is another big project which is underway through the IMO with support of the 2 global training institutions, that's IMBLI and the World Maritime University, and this project is funded by the Lloyd's Register Foundation. So here, we have a couple of objectives before us. We started in September, and it will run until December of next year. So first and foremost is the awareness raising on the model regulations. And this is what I'm here today for. So raising awareness. But I believe we should not rest at simply raising awareness. We should transform it in an action plan. So I combine the awareness raising with taking actions to implement the model regulations in our respective countries. Regional and national stakeholder consultations, I think this is happening through the AMA conference already. Preparation of an explanatory manual. So we have done some conceptualization already. A couple of chapters have been drafted. So there will be two components to it. There is the legal component, which will be contributed by the IMLI, and there will be the technical component comprising of more than 12 chapters for the safety component and the technical component. So together, this will be like a hard copy training manual, and this will be available through one of the IMO documents in the future. Sometime next year, you will have the draft. This will be followed up with an e-learning material, which some of you may be already accessing the IMO website for several different e-learning courses. So there are two which are already published there. There is one which is contributed by Korea. There are two, and there is a training manual which is already provided by China. However, this is one which will be specifically focused on the implementation of the model regulations. So this e-learning material will be available by the end of next year. And the last activity over here, which is practical, and which is why I will request participation from each member state over here, that's the establishment of the online best practices forum. So unless we receive inputs from the member states, we will not be able to populate this best practices information sharing forum. Support for drafting regulations. So this will happen through the support of the IMO. It's a collective activity. So member states who are interested in receiving support through the technical cooperation scheme may get in touch with the IMO, and we can decide how best to achieve this particular outcome. There is another project which is underway, which is in final stages of conceptualization and implementation, and this is the SCOPE project, which is funded by the European Union. So it is a longer project for 3 years, and there are some specific countries which are identified as recipients of this project. Recent activities, as you can see, consequent to the adoption of the model regulations, there has been an uptick of activities specifically focused on domestic ferry safety. So last year, there was one in Kampala, Uganda, and there was participation from several countries in the region. This year, in April, I was here, and we were here, some of you were here as well, and this was a regional seminar on ferry safety. This was supported by Interferry, and of course, IMO was also part of this initiative. Then there was, in July, a couple of months later, in July, so there was this major activity, which was IMO, IMRF, and MOCA. We have the Secretary General here. And I think this was a wonderful activity, which culminated in something very tangible. It was called the Liberal Plan of Action, and which is what I will share with you today as well, because now we have bigger ambitions for the whole of the continent. And then it was followed up with another activity in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. And this was another recent activity. Now this was in the Pacific. They have in the Pacific, some of you may be aware, there is a dedicated forum for domestic ship safety. So we spent a whole week thinking, discussing issues about all countries and on domestic ferry safety. And the similar action plan was promoted over there, and we spent half a day discussing each of the actions, and it was very productive. So I'm hoping for similar achievements at this particular event over here. Training materials, I mentioned these to you already. There are a couple which are available on the IMO website, and if you wish to have access, you can contact the IMO or you can get in touch with me. I mentioned this to you already, two major initiatives. So there is the training manual, which will be a PDF kind of thing, and then there is the more active engagement part, that will be the e-learning course and the best practices forum. More about the best practices forum later. So what is the AMA action plan, and what's the basis for this? So why do we need the action plan? I take this content, this text, from the invitation for this particular event, and I highlight a couple of things. The imperative to enhance safety. And you can see the preceding text, urgent need for sustainable development. You had the presentations yesterday on the urgent need. And today this presentation is about the imperative to enhance safety. We have some lawyers in this forum, so they may highlight which has more weight, the urgent need or the imperative. So the aim is to move beyond information exchange. So my presentation targets this aim to move beyond the information exchange towards developing actionable roadmap. And this is also part of the invitation letter, which all of us received. Develop actionable roadmaps that outline the steps necessary. So we need to have something concrete, and this is what my presentation aims to address. So how to achieve this objective? Like yesterday, we have the aim, we know our goal, so what are the actions? So here are the actions. To understand the actions, we also need to know who are the actors. And the actors are at all levels. It starts from the masters of all the vessels. Every vessel needs to have a master. So the masters have responsibilities at the ground level on board the vessels. And sometimes there may be companies or sometimes there may be individuals. But that's the next level. And this also relates to the presentation from our IMO colleague. It links to SOLAS. It links to the ISM code as well. So that's where the company sits. And then the most important players, the most important stakeholder is the state. The flag state, if you can think, if I may say so. And then as a collective, you have the sub-regional Moesna. In fact, I've shared this plan with Moesna as well. So Mocha and Moesna, the sub-regional groupings, and then the regional collective over here as AMA. So there is the collective action and there's the individual action. So and all the way on top, you can think of the IMO. So IMO working through AMA, the sub-regional groups, and the individual member states. So it will be fantastic collaboration at all levels. But what are the actions we need to do? These are the actors. The goals, I've identified 11 different goals. Goal 11 is unique. It's on the lines of the Sustainable Development Goals. 1 to 10 is individual goals, and 11 cannot be achieved without the support and collaboration at all these different levels. So it's partnership for the goals. So 10 individual goals, and 11 is partnership for the goals. So what are the individual goals? These are taken directly from the model regulations. So the key regulations have been identified, and they have been converted into action plans. So goal 1, the most important one when we think of safety, is safety culture. So we need to put in place effective mechanisms to promote and strengthen safety culture. And nothing on these action plans are new. If you think of SOLAS, if you think of what is happening as a flag state, most of this is already happening. So we are trying to take the key things, because SOLAS is a huge document running to more than 500 or 600 pages. So we need to have something simple which is affordable and achievable, simple action plan. So this is how I identify them. And you can read them in your own time. My idea was to put all the points here. So when we go back from this forum, we have all the points available. So there is something at the masters level, for example, conducting safety meetings, regular safety fires and drills. Then the company level, you can think of the ISM code. So what about the member states? And don't think of the company and master as isolated, because you can add the word ensure that the company, and then you find that the state has a role to play at the company level. Ensure that the master does ABCD. So which means the state has a role to play, although I have put 3 separate columns and 3 rows, but the state has a role to play at every level. What it has to do itself and what it has to ensure at the company level and at the master's level. So the most important thing is national policy for operational safety. We have discussed about national action plans for decarbonization and other things, national action plan for security. But how about national plan for operational safety of domestic ferries? Because this involves lives, and several different lives are at risk. There are several tragedies which are happening every once in a while. So I think this is very important. Establishing a regime of inspections, tests, surveys. So we do this for the regular convention vessels, but how about doing similar things for non-convention vessels? The next is safety management and governance. This comes from the ISM code. It's inspired from the ISM. You can see SMS, which is safety management system. So first you need to regulate and ensure that they need to have a safety management system, and then you need to audit these systems for verification and compliance. And then there are some responsibilities at the master's level and company level, which the flag state shall ensure. Occupational health and safety. This took primacy, especially in times of COVID. In normal times, we may not pay much attention. There are regular things happening on board, but there are slips, trips, and falls and other things. So definitely, occupational health and safety is great importance. If you think of the bigger vessels, for example, enclosed space entry is continuing concern. So occupational safety, this comes also from the model regulations. So we need to have a policy in place. And place of refuge is not only for environment. We borrow a similar idea and we put it for place of refuge for, let's say, health and safety issues, sudden large-scale outbreaks of contagious disease. COVID is past, but we had Ebola before that. There could be something else in the future. So do we have a place of refuge, or do we ask the vessels to stay away? These are our domestic vessels. We can't ask them to stay away. They have to come back to shore. We have to have systems in place to deal with such issues. Navigation and radio communications, this is critical. It requires investments by masters on board their vessels, and then it requires systems to be established as a coastal state as well. And then promulgation of navigational routes. This is very important, and this is not directly found in SOLAS, but this is very critical for safety of domestic ferries. We need to know which are the ferries registered in our country, in our jurisdiction, what are the routes they are expected to take, what is the carrying capacity in terms of both passengers and cargo, and what is the limitations of weather, because not all are big vessels and they cannot sustain all kinds of weather states. So these limits in terms of weather, etc., and the area of operation needs to be clearly defined. And I can recommend to have a look at the Philippines project where we have devised a simplified, if some of you, those who are mariners, have seen a 10-point scale for the Beaufort. So we have provided a red line across beyond scale 5, and we have also provided a matrix depending on the tonnage of the vessel. So that would be a good practice which we can use in other states as well. Storage and securing, this already links to Gisela's presentation. So it has security implications, but security also has safety implications for the vessel. And this is resource intensive. Something needs to be done as infrastructure at the boarding points on board. And then you need to have your system in place on how you will ensure compliance.
4 minutes.
4, okay, thank you very much. Seaworthiness, this needs no emphasis, and because of its importance, you will find several actions which are listed over here. One of the most important things which states could establish is a pre-departure inspection. Of course, this may be human resource intensive because you may have ferries departing and arriving at several different ports in your jurisdiction, but this would be very critical. A regime of pre-departure inspections and maintaining a database of these pre-departure inspections to see which are the vessels and which are the companies at risk. So this is one thing which I would like to highlight. And who receives the reports and what happens after the reports are received. Full compliance, this links to the previous one. So establish a law prohibiting any vessel which is non-compliant being put out to sea and strictly enforcing this thing. When we were in Fiji, one interesting thing which came out was, so there was this one operator, so we all face it. Let's say there is Christmas and there is peak traffic. So beyond your capacity, passengers are trying to board your vessel. So they called up the flag state, and the flag state detained the vessel. So it was initiated by the operator. So I thought this is a very good practice. I mean, rather than the flag state trying to enforce why you're taking more passengers, when you see you're getting overloaded and you do not want to make the passengers unhappy. They are local populations, maybe they are using your ferry services all the time. But you can always make a call to the flag state, hey, I need your help. I'm overloaded now. So when the vessel is detained, they cannot blame the ship operator. So you maintain the goodwill and the flag state takes the flak. Yeah, that's their job as well. Yeah. Aids to navigation. So this is infrastructure. It involves funding, and it's easy to write these points. Let's say have proper navigational aids, have proper dredging, but sometimes you may not have a dredger in the first place. Or even if they're available, they're attending to other areas. So this requires more consideration on the infrastructure planning and funding side. Marine casualty investigation, this is a specific focus. We do a lot of it in our courses at the World Maritime University. IMO engages in special training programs dedicated to casualty investigation, so please feel free to approach the IMO to avail such courses. And this is very critical, to learn what went wrong, why it went wrong, and to prevent similar things from happening in the future. Duty to render assistance, this is universal, and it is captured here in the model regulations. The most important one, roadmap. This is Goal 11, Partnership for the Goals. High-level cooperation, collaboration, and that will happen at the AMA level, and I've not mentioned here, but of course, MOCA, MOESNA. So you all cooperate, collaborate, establish and monitor a set of indicators. So where do the indicators come from? They come from goals 1 to 10. I give you several points, so each point can be translated to an indicator. And then we can start monitoring and see and measure our progress. And then for the collective, AMA itself, I have some points over here. Collecting. AMA did a fabulous work trying to get these people here for this forum. So similar thing could be done. Here is my matrix. Can you please fill out and provide it to the Secretariat? And maybe if we have the opportunity, I can be at the next forum, at the 8th one, and present the results of the indicators. What was the outcome? What did we find, and how did we use these indicators? So this would be a proposed agenda for the next one, 8th session of the AMA. And you can read it in your own time. I have mentioned something about the World Maritime University, partnership for developing these indicators and collecting the indicators. And we have a wonderful resource. It's called the Maritime Commons. If you have not used it before, please feel free. All the resources in this Maritime Commons are free. So whatever kind of research we do at the World Maritime University, including our students and the faculty, this is one place repository. So when we finish our LRF project, which involves the IMO, IMBLI, and so on, so that training manual will also go into that Maritime Commons. And if we work together with AMA, for example, so all these best practices, etc., will also form part of this Maritime Commons. So the best practices don't remain in the region, they are disseminated to the rest of the world as well. So that's the benefit. So the best practices are shared across the globe. And then, like all the other goals, so these are at the national, company, and state level. So the roadmap comes on top. This is the summary of all that I discussed. So there are the 10 goals, and the overarching partnership for the goals is over here. So this is a clear roadmap on how to achieve and implement the model regulations. It's already 2 years. Please remember, we adopted in 2022. 2 years have passed, and you can start thinking, what have I done in the last 2 years? What can I do in the next 1 year or the next 2 years? Possibly much more than what I did in the past. So I have 2 specific recommendations. It's an overview of what I mentioned before. The AMA can consider adopting the AMA Plan of Action, which I flashed over here, and I'm more than happy to provide a written text for all of this if it is useful and necessary, but I can do that. So this is the first recommendation. And the second more important recommendation is, I mentioned our ongoing project through the IMO with participation of IMBLI, funded by the Lloyd's Register. Please, 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 3 times. Think of the best practices. We are always very happy to mention a challenge whenever we have discussions. Oh, I have this challenge, I have this issue, I have this problem. And you will never realize, call a meeting of your delegates when you go back to your administration and say, please, give us our best practices. What are we doing here which we can share within AMA and which we can share with the rest of the world? And I'm sure in 1 week, you will be able to write to safety@wmo.sc and say here. And I'm hoping that you can give me at least 100 best practices, and we can put up in the WMO Maritime Commons and say, hey, rest of the world, here we have for you from Africa, with love and pleasure for safety for all. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Maybe it's later. Thank you.
Chief Moderator, the next speaker has about 10 minutes or so. I'm sorry if I'm cutting a little bit of time, as we may need the 20 minutes that will be remaining for the panelists that will be joining for a quick interjection from them for about 5 minutes. We'd like to finish on time.
Thank you, Professor. We've heard from Gisela on how IMO is setting the guidance and leading maritime community to have safe shipping and sustainable maritime. Professor Anish have highlighted on domestic ship safety. Let us now welcome Eru Takem, who is going to present on how our countries implement IMO instruments in order to achieve safe shipping. You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Before I start, permit me express heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to the ASA Secretariat for the excellent job of organizing the 7th conference of the AMA, which is extremely, I must indicate, interesting. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, the task which was assigned to me is actually to examine how IMSA's audit contributes to maritime safety. And to achieve that, I've got 4 compartments, 4 chapters, 4 seven sections, which I'm going to try and rush very fast with them, bearing in mind that we have shortage of time. The first one is evolution of the IMO member state audit scheme. So we are going to see how the IMO member state audit scheme has evolved from 2006 when it started. The second one is common misconceptions regarding the scope of the IMSAS audit. The third one will be the legal framework governing IMSAS audit. The fourth one will be key points for analysis of the consolidated audit summary report. And it will be followed by the analysis of the root causes, because we have to examine why do we have these problems? Why do we have these shortcomings? It's a little bit trying to say, it's a little bit trying to say you're trying to find out why you failed and not where you failed. So you are trying to go to the root cause and find out the cost of your problems. So the sixth slide will be on observations on the corrective action, implementation, and follow-up report. And lastly, we are going to have recommendations. So, starting all over with the evolution of IMO member state audit scheme, I must indicate that it all started in 2006 on a voluntary basis, and it was later on transitioned to a mandatory or treaty obligation in 2016. That is when it became a mandatory and a treaty obligation. Through the amendments of a number of key conventions, key IMO conventions, there are 6 in number. We have the SOLAS, MAPL, STCW, International Conventions of Low Line, Tonnage Convention, and equally COLREG 1972. So these conventions were amended to include a verification of compliance clause that made it obligatory to go through the audit. So from 2016, every country, every IMO member state had to go through the IMSAS audit. Now, the next part we are going to deal on will be the common misconception regarding the scope of the IMSAS audit. It's a little bit trying to find out what the IMSAS audit is not, so that we are clear from here on. The first thing is that IMSAS audit focuses on selected group of IMO conventions. I mentioned them, there were just 6. There are 6 basic conventions on which the IMSAS audit focuses on, not beyond that. The IMO member state audit scheme does not utilize binary pass and fail outcome. Well, when you complete the audit, you don't pass or you fail. Rather, it presents a report where an assessment of how you perform in implementation of IMO instruments is stressed out or is outlined. The last part is it's important to understand that IMSAS audits evaluate member states' complete system for implementing IMO instrument. What am I trying to say? That what is... Sorry? All right. Sorry? Okay. Yeah.
Better.
All right. Thank you very much. So, the misconception sometimes is to believe that the IMSAS audits the Maritime Authority. No, it's wrong. The IMSAS audit audits the whole maritime implementation system of the country. What does that mean? It implies that the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Fishery, for those countries where the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Fisheries intervene in the implementation of the audit, will all be audited. Now, there was a misconception that occurred while we were in, while I was the single point of contact of Cameroon. When we approached the Ministry of Environment and asked them for some information to fill the pre-audit questionnaire, which I'm going to explain in the subsequent slides, the first thing they told us was, that was your thing. Go ahead and organize your thing. However, during the audit itself, when the auditors came up, they asked for everybody to be around the table. The Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Fishery, even the navies were supposed to be around the table to discuss on how they implement IMO instruments. That was extremely important because it gave us the pure idea of how to understand how to put a system together to implement IMO instruments. So the 3 points, the 3 misconceptions I want to clear out is, first, the IMSAS audit is not about assessing the implementation or the performance of Maritime Authority. It is assessing the whole maritime system that is in charge of implementing IMO instruments. Now, still, sorry. So the next slide is on the legal framework governing IMSA's audit. But before I get to that, I want to clear some one or two definitions. The first one is what's a finding and what's an observation, because you will hear these words again and again. The first thing is that a finding is a situation where objective evidence indicates non-compliance with a mandatory requirement contained in the audit standard or IMO instrument. In contrast, observation is a statement of fact substantiated by objective evidence relating to non-mandatory provisions of the audit standard. What does that actually mean? It means when the auditors carry their job, they conduct the audit, they identify a shortcoming. If the shortcoming emanates from a mandatory IMO instrument, which could be SOLAS, MAPO, SCCW, or the audit standard itself, and I will come back on the audit standard, permit me, or the audit standard itself, that shortcoming amounts to a finding. However, if the shortcoming emanates from a non-mandatory provision of the audit standard, implying that if it emanates from a recommendation, I will take an example of article or paragraph 3 of the audit standard, which recommends that member states put in place an overall maritime strategy. Now, remember, there is a key word, recommendation. It recommends, hence, it's not obligatory, hence, it's not mandatory. So, any shortcomings of not putting in place that document or that overall maritime strategy becomes an observation. So, having cleared that doubt, ladies and gentlemen, there are two pillars, two important documents that support the audit, and for which any single point of contact or the auditors need to understand them before conducting their job. The first one is, I've talked about it already, the IMO Instrument Implementation Code, which is the standard of the audit. In fact, it is the substance of the audit. And this document comprises of basically 4 sections. The first section is the common areas. The second section, give me a minute, please. Good. The first section is the common areas, which you see on the board. The second section is the flag state obligations. The third one are coastal state obligations, and the fourth one are port state obligations. I won't get into the nitty-gritties of these different sections because we have shortage of time. However, I want you to keep in mind the highlighted portions: strategy, initial action, communication of information for common areas, flag state obligations, keep in mind the implementation, delegation of authority, and flag state investigations. We will come back to it. So the second document I was discussing about is that of the framework and procedure of the IMSA's audit. Now, this is a document that sets the activities and the timeline for the audit. The first thing is it equally provides issues related to the designation of the auditors or the nomination of the auditors, the lead auditor. The conduct of the audit, the time, Now, it equally describes the opening meeting of the audit, the conduct of the opening meeting of the audit, and the closing meeting of the audit. But there's a very important aspect of this document which I want to highlight. It is the Memorandum of Cooperation. The Memorandum of Cooperation actually outlines the obligation and responsibility of the member states and the IMO. Now, what does it actually indicate? It tells you what the member state has to do in terms of logistics, in terms of when the auditors are in their country. Now, who is going to handle issues related to transportation within the country? But it equally goes as far as indicating the communication of the audit. And this is a very important aspect. And I'll give you a quick example of how important it was for a country like Cameroon. Now, in the moment or when the audit, the Memorandum of Cooperation was being signed, it was indicated that the language of the audit will be French. Now, before the audit itself could concretely take off, Cameroon went through some small crises. And the crisis was actually a linguistic-based crisis. Hence, a law had come out that, as from henceforth, every official activity should be carried out in both languages, because Cameroon is a bilingual country, French and English. Now, you realize that it had an effect on the auditors, because you had to change all 3 auditors were designated. So you had to take auditors who had a mastery of both English and French. That is how important the Memorandum of Cooperation is. It's a non-negligible document. Now, the procedure will equally indicate the principles of the audit in terms of universality and sovereignty. You will find all of these issues indicated there. I won't have time to go into it. But I must indicate that it equally demonstrates or describes how the final report is going to be submitted, the content of the final report. Because that is actually why you are being audited, to be handed a document where you can detect exactly where your problems are. The final report and equally the corrective action plan, because after the audit, there is an interim report which is submitted, and the member state has to prepare a corrective action plan 3 months after. And the corrective action plan actually tells IMO how the member state intends to resolve the different findings and observations which were indicated in the interim report. And it is based on that we have a final report. So the final report includes the interim report and the corrective action plan, which is sent back to the member state. So having cleared those aspects, we will now, I hope I'm right there, yes. We will now get into the analysis of the consolidated audit summary report. Now, after some period, IMO puts in place a consolidated report, and we are now in the 6th edition of the consolidated report. This one takes into consideration 82 audits, which were carried out from 2016 to 2022. And it reveals some very interesting aspects. Let me put on my glasses so I could extend my vision. Yeah, it reveals some very important aspects. And I did remind you that you should take into consideration the highlighted aspects I talked about. And let's look at the first aspect, titled strategy. You would realize that in terms of strategy, there were about 74 shortcomings, 74 findings, which were indicated in that report. But if you go further, you would realize that there were 66 shortcomings or findings indicated under the initial action, and under communication, we have 76 findings. Now, these 3 aspects that we just indicated contributed to the highest number of findings. And it reveals the different areas where member states need to put effort in terms of addressing, the challenges in their maritime safety component. I will take the first one, called strategy. What is the strategy all about? I did indicate that according to Article 3 of the Triple Code, member states are recommended to put in place an overall maritime strategy that describes how they intend to implement IMO instruments. Now, this strategy is different from what we call the National Maritime Transport Policy. The National Maritime Transport Policy talks about the overall maritime vision of the country. In that regard, most countries... So in that regard, most countries did not have this strategy. That's the reason why you realize that it contributed to the highest number of findings. The second one was initial actions. Initial actions, which actually concerns legislation. The promulgation of legislation to implement IMO instruments. So there were roughly 76 findings on this section, on initial actions. And we had 76 findings equally on communication of information, because after you must have drafted your strategy, you must have taken or promulgated laws, you have to communicate them. And this is contained in most of IMO standard instruments like SOLAS. You have to communicate them. And most countries failed in this aspect. They failed to communicate the laws they had promulgated. You would equally see within the aspect of flag state that we had on implementation roughly 76 findings equally. So what I'm trying to draw your attention to here is that most of the findings which were identified were on issues related to the law, were on issues related to legislation, were on issues related to instruments, directives. But what does that call to mind? It calls to mind that, most certainly, member states took the time to ratify the conventions, but they failed to take implementation measures. In fact, do not forget, by not ratifying the convention, you are not bound by the convention. It's fine. But the moment you ratify the convention, not implementing it, you are in breach of your international obligations.
1 minute.
Thank you very much. So, what were the root causes of these findings? First, the lack of national provision and legislation. I talked about that. Second, the lack of policies. The overall strategy was not in place. The lack of awareness, understanding, or interpretation of the requirements. Insufficient resources, both human and financial. We'll talk about it in the recommendations. Lack of technical capability, trained personnel, hardware, and equipment, and lack of management system. And I must indicate I'm not the one saying this, making this up. If you go to the GC's platform, you will find most of these areas, these elements I've just discussed about. So, in terms of observations on the corrective action implementation and follow-up report, what did we observe? Before I indicate what we observed, let me just point out that while findings and root causes highlight the challenges encountered by an IMO member state, the corrective action plan outlines targeted solutions aimed at effectively addressing these issues. So, the corrective action plan is extremely important because that is exactly how you want to solve the problems and the findings you have identified. First observations, 29 African member states have been audited by IMO. Second, 22 African member states have submitted corrective action plan. Third, 12 African member states have conducted audit follow-up. 8 African member states have fulfilled the 3 to 4 year criteria necessary for conducting follow-up audits, but they haven't done so. The outcomes of the audit follow-up process conducted for 37 member states reveal a notable low rate of corrective action plan implementation, with only 5% of actions completed and just 2.5% effectively carried out. What about the recommendations? How can we improve on the implementation of the corrective action plan and solving the root causes and the findings which were identified? First, it is advised that we develop maritime law courses specializing in legislation drafting through partnership with the regional institutions like RMU, based in Ghana, the Regional Maritime University, ARSTM, based in Ivory Coast, and establish international institutions, including the World Maritime University. So we talked yesterday about capacity sharing. We think there is a good space for us here to share capacity from the perspective of IMLI and the perspective of the World Maritime University, because they will be bringing their credibility. And at the same time, we could have some exchange of lecturers. But do not forget, sometimes these things might take time. So we need to solve the problem in the short while. And the solution to it is to put in place or conduct summer programs, providing in-depth comparative analysis of monist and dualist legal framework. Do not forget, most of our legal system are based on either the monist orientation or the dualist orientation. So we expect that the short course programs will address this issue and provide a legal framework that is adaptable to each member state. Collaborate with the International Law Institute to provide tailored support to national maritime authorities and governance institutions, acknowledging each nation's unique context. The fourth one, implement comprehensive programs designed to articulate economic and social benefits of the maritime sector to legislators, policymakers, government officials, thereby fostering informed and supportive policy decisions. The reason why I brought this is because if you take a small survey of how the audits were conducted, you realize that in most countries, there was no budget for the audit. The countries had to basically fight their way in order to conduct the audit. And even after that, implementing the audit corrective action plan was a challenge because they didn't have the financial resources, nor did they have the human resources. And this is simply because most of our legislators do not understand the importance of the maritime sector. After all, it's something which is very far. If it was aviation, it would have been very simple. You just need to take a plane and understand exactly what aviation is, how aviation is important. But when it comes to the maritime sector, there's a need for lobbying. There's a need for awareness. There's a need for us to leave a little bit our comfort zone and reach out to the policymakers, the parliamentarians, the other ministers. They need to understand the benefits of the maritime sector. And lastly, establish a robust collaborative platform with regional economic communities, specialized maritime organizations, continental organization. And I'm glad to see that the African Union is right here. That's exactly what we are trying to say, because they need to understand. Take the example of the ECOWAS and the ECAS, or the SADC. These are all political organizations, and they need to understand the importance of the maritime sector so that there could be a ripple effect. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
So due to time, I think may we request our presenter. Let's put our hands together to our presenters. Thank you very much. But we're also going to request that you move down to the floor now so that you can hear the panelists discuss some of the issues that you raised. And Chief Moderator, I believe you have Captain King Chiragi. Please could you join us on the stage? I'm just assisting you here. Mustafa Chai, Captain Getnet Gebru, and Dr. Richard Latte. Please join us for very quick interjections, about five minutes each one, and please be as comprehensive as you can within the time allotted. So we're going to take this to 10:45. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be behind by 15 minutes. All right, let's proceed.
Thank you. After receiving the Maritime Safety and Security overview from our presenters, it's now time to engage in the discussion with our esteemed panelists. Please join me in welcoming Captain Getunet. Captain, you are still not here. Mustafa Shaye from Morocco, already here, thank you. Captain King Chiragi, please come to join us. We are going to also have Richard Latte. Okay, this one was already here, and Vincent. Okay, while Captain Chiragi is coming, without wasting time, we're going to start with Captain Getunet, who is working with the Ethiopian Maritime Authority. And I'm going to thank you. I was receiving an extra that King Chiragi will not be with us today, so we will remain with our 4 panelists. And we'll start with Captain Getunet, and I would like to start to question you as a lady. What are the critical security challenges in Africa maritime domain, and how can a regional cooperation be strengthened? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, the facilitator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. I'm privileged to talk about the challenge of maritime security in the African maritime domain. In my opinion, the first thing we should think is understanding the current landscape of the threats of maritime, the current ones. We are facing a plethora of challenges threatening our prosperity, and they are dynamic. We started with traditional local piracy and armed robbery, but now here we end up in a very complicated attacks, such as missile, drone attacks, IUU fishing, which also started from small scale to industrial level. The traffickings, weapon, drug, narcotics, which are now carried out by very organized criminals, and even oil dumping or oil transferred in an unsafe way, which is risking the maritime pollution in our high seas, and cyber attack, which is affecting many shipping companies and organizations. All these dynamic threats are affecting our maritime domain. The dynamism will continue. It differs from country to country, from region to the region. So we have to make ourselves ready for that. To do that, we need to have regional cooperations. What we have started with Djibouti Code of Conduct and Yaoundé Code of Conduct, they are bringing good results. And in the meantime, we need to have also civil and military cooperation, collaboration within the national level. At the same time, at the regional and international level, we need to have to cooperate, because maritime is cross-cutting. Everybody will benefit from the maritime security. So we need to have cooperation with international actors who are involved in the critical corridor, in institutions, maritime universities who are making researches on how to tackle the emerging problems. So cooperation is very important. At national level, Ms. Gisela already mentioned what we should do. The National Maritime Security Committee is crucial. Having a risk register, prioritizing the risk register when it comes to the Djibouti Code of Conduct, preparing a matrix so that what kind of action we require, what kind of assistance we require should be identified by the national focal points, and then the Djibouti Code of Conduct capacity building working group will find partners to deal with some of the assistance required from the international community, either through the IMO or through bilateral. It could be in kind, it could be through donation. So these are some of the examples we need to do regionally. iSpace is our one of cornerstone when we talk about maritime security. I believe iSpace also has to be revised from time to time, because the maritime security threats are changing rapidly, and we need to modify iSpace so that our seafarers, our port authority personnel understand the current threats and prepare themselves to defend themselves. For example, the current threat in the Red Sea area, which is missile drone attack, our seafarers are not prepared for this kind of threat before. But now it is our duty to equip them for that. In conclusion, I would say the threats are bringing political instability, they are affecting our economy, they have a lot of bad impact on our economy, and they also have environmental threats. For that, continuous dialogue and regional cooperation is very important. We have to also think of the capacity building all the time, enhancing our equipment and assets. equipping with the technology needed is very crucial. More than everything, we need to have information sharing platform to identify targets who are posing threats to our domain. Having said, if there is any question, I may answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain, for insight on maritime security. And for the sake of time, we'll go straight to invite the second panelist, who is Mustafa Sheye, the head of Maritime Safety Department from Morocco. He will discuss on maritime safety. And I would like you to take the question as follows. What are the key actions needed to address safety challenges in the region?
Thank you, Madam. Mustafa Sheye from the Maritime Administration of Morocco. My English is not so good. I will speak in French. It's better for me and it's easy. Une petite précision de traduction seulement, c'est que le traducteur traduit security par sécurité. Sécurité doit être traduite par sûreté. C'est sûreté. Security en français, c'est sûreté. C'est pas sécurité. C'est une petite précision de traduction. Pour répondre à la question, je vais commencer par la dernière slide de M. Takim du Cameroun. Il nous a cité un certain nombre de recommandations. Ces recommandations, bien sûr, la première, c'est concernant la réglementation. Et l'importance de la réglementation, bien sûr, elle n'est pas à démontrer. Par contre, chaque fois qu'on fait des sortes de recommandations, on fait des réunions, on fait un audit, chaque fois on part vers des descriptifs, on décrit la situation. Voilà ce qui nous manque, voilà ce que nous recommandons, mais rarement on passe à l'étape suivante. C'est comment faire ça et surtout qui doit faire ça, qui va faire ça. Le Maroc a subi l'audit obligatoire il y a seulement 2 semaines, donc c'est très récent et l'audit a sorti un certain nombre de conclusions et de constatations. Et l'analyse de ces audits ne s'éloigne pas trop de ce qui sort des rapports de l'OMI concernant les statistiques sur les conclusions et les constatations. Comme vous l'avez vu dans la présentation de M. Takim, vous voyez que 42% des findings, des écarts, c'est pour l'état de pavillon, 15% c'est l'état du port, 16% c'est l'état côtier et 27% c'est les éléments communs. Et lorsqu'on on analyse ces éléments-là, on va dire pourquoi on arrive là, et surtout pour l'Afrique. Le Maroc a évolué sur pas mal de choses concernant les maritimes, mais pour dire quels sont les défis ou quelles sont les causes de tout cela, c'est que, comme a dit M. Takim aussi, parce qu'il a fait une très bonne présentation, c'est que les multitudes d'intervenants dans la sécurité maritime. Vous travaillez pour trouver plusieurs multitudes. Je vais donner l'exemple de l'environnement. C'est un exemple qui est très courant. Il n'y a pas une seule entité qui s'intéresse à la sécurité maritime. Par exemple, au Maroc, nous avons pour l'état du pavillon, nous avons 2 départements. Pour l'état du port, 4 départements. Pour l'état du côtier, 6 départements. Et vous voyez que c'est très difficile souvent de réunir tous ces gens-là pour pouvoir les mettre sur la même table. Il y a aussi la perception ou l'importance que donnent les autorités en Afrique à la question de la sécurité. On ne se souvient de la sécurité maritime et par voie de conséquence de la pollution que s'il y a un grand accident ou une grande pollution. À ce moment-là, on va chercher des responsables et on va dire pourquoi on n'a pas mis pas mis les moyens pour contrer ça ou pour prévenir ça, pourquoi on n'a pas fait ceci ou cela. On se souvient de ça que pendant les accidents. Malgré que les accidents sont des événements vraiment tristes, mais des fois, ça nous rappelle ce que nous devons faire, ou plutôt ce que nous n'avons pas fait. Le problème de la réglementation, à chaque fois, il revient et on dit pourquoi on n'a pas de réglementation. On dit parce que nous n'avons pas de ressources. Pourquoi nous n'avons pas de ressources? Et on vous dit parce que la réglementation qui est là nous empêche de recruter des personnels pour pouvoir faire la réglementation. Et on tourne comme ça. C'est pratiquement la même chose dans tous les pays. Et lorsque nous voulons faire la réglementation, nous faisons appel à des spécialistes, entre guillemets, qui viennent, ils font une analyse et on vous dit, voilà, vous allez faire comme ça, voilà, vous allez faire comme ça. Bien sûr, en copiant un modèle de quelque part qui ne colle pas substantiellement avec ce que vous avez, et vous vous trouvez avec des lois qu'on applique ou qu'on n'appliquera jamais. L'approche que nous allons adopter après l'audit, mais c'est une approche en fin de compte qui date d'un peu plus loin, c'est que nous allons accorder une grande importance au personnel de l'administration. Le personnel de l'administration, ce sont les agents de l'administration, ce sont ces agents-là qui font les visites, les agents qui préparent les visites, les agents qui font les enquêtes nautiques, les agents qui font le suivi des organismes reconnus. Parce que ce qui est bizarre, et c'est ce que je vois, c'est que l'OMI a donné une grande importance aux gens de mer. Nous avons une convention STCW sur la formation des gens de mer. Mais les agents, ou plutôt les gens, le personnel qui contrôle la formation, ce sont des agents de l'administration. Les agents, le personnel qui contrôle les organismes reconnus, ce sont des agents de l'administration. Ceux qui font les immatriculations des navires, ce sont les agents de l'administration. Donc, ce sont des gens qui ont une grande importance, un grand travail, mais concernant leur formation, on voit par exemple dans le code 3I que ce sont des personnels qui sont soit des marins, soit des ingénieurs qui viennent, à qui on fait une formation spécifique sur le maritime et ainsi de suite. La solution de facilité qui était auparavant, c'est de dire que pour avoir du personnel de l'administration, nous allons prendre des marins et nous allons leur faire une petite formation. En général, ce sont des gens compétents qui ont travaillé sur le navire. Ils font la tâche facilement, ils font des inspections, ils font ceci, ils font cela. Le problème est que ces marins ne veulent plus travailler de l'administration. L'administration n'est plus attractive partout dans le monde. Pourquoi? Lorsque vous appelez un marin, vous lui donnez un salaire, le deuxième jour, il trouve un salaire qui est 5 à 10 fois plus grand, bien sûr, il va quitter. Au Maroc, nous avons fait des concours de recrutement de marins pour occuper des postes dans l'administration. Ça fait pratiquement le 5e fois et toujours 0 candidature.
One minute.
Oui. La solution que nous allons adopter nous-mêmes, c'est que ne plus considérer ces agents-là comme des auxiliaires, mais sont des acteurs principaux dans l'action maritime, que ce soit dans l'état de pavillon, l'état de port, l'état côtier. Et nous allons former nos propres inspecteurs, nos propres agents maritimes qui vont faire ce travail-là avec un cursus, avec des perspectives de carrière, et ne pas chaque fois attendre d'autres cursus que nous allons former. Une fois ces gens-là trouvent mieux, ils partiront ailleurs. Lorsqu'on revient à la réglementation, c'est un problème pratiquement mondial, ça revient pratiquement dans tous les audits, dans les constats les conclusions d'audit. Chaque fois, pour faire la réglementation, je reviens toujours comment et qui va faire la réglementation. On n'a pas à attendre un généraliste ou un juriste généraliste qui va nous faire la réglementation. La réglementation, nous avons fait deux exercices les 2 dernières années. Nous avons établi des lois, c'est moi-même qui avais supervisé ça, et nous avons réussi à les sortir nous-mêmes avec notre propre personnel. Nous n'avons fait appel à personne. Notre personnel d'administration, ce sont ces gens-là de qui je vous parle. Le troisième problème, c'est toujours c'est la complexité d'avoir des navires sous pavillon. Parce que pour que je puisse avoir et convaincre les politiques d'avoir du personnel, il faut que j'aie un pavillon, c'est normal. Pourquoi avoir tout ce personnel-là? C'est de l'argent, c'est de la formation, mais moi-même, je n'ai pas du pavillon. J'étais en discussion ce matin avec une charmante dame, là, c'est la présidente de l'association des armateurs, une présidente, et on était convaincus que c'est très difficile d'avoir des navires sous pavillon, mais c'est encore plus difficile et plus dur de les garder sous pavillon. Parce que si l'administration ne prend pas en charge elle-même ses propres agents, peut-être que nous n'aurons jamais de pavillon, nous n'aurons jamais de navires qui viendront chez nous. Parce que tout simplement, au premier problème, il n'y a personne qui va répondre au téléphone parce que ces gens-là ne sont pas compétents, ne sont pas capables de suivre et de réaliser les objectifs de ces navires. Je m'excuse d'être un peu très long, mais je crois que c'est la conclusion. Merci.
Thank you, Mustafa, for your presentation. And now, as you are moving on, we are going to have Dr. Richard Lati, who is a Senior Deputy Director in charge of Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation in Maritime in Ghana. Let me see, Ghana Maritime Authority. He's going to speak about the roles of national and regional actors in enhancing maritime security in our region. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and good morning, everybody. All right, so the issue of maritime safety and security has been on the IMO agenda for a very long time. And we've had a lot of submissions made by the previous presenters and the panelists. And so I don't want to belabor the point. But it's very important to emphasize the critical role that national and regional actors play when it comes to enhancing maritime safety and security. I believe a lot of IMO member states in Africa have ratified SOLAS Chapter 11.2 and the ISPS codes. These are two critical codes or conventions that focus on the maritime security and safety. And it is not only okay to ratify a convention. It's very important that once you have ratified the convention, there's the need for you to domesticate it into national legislation. And beyond that, you must also have some policies and strategies in order to give effect to the conventions that you have ratified. And so national and regional actors need to go beyond ratifying conventions, and they should domesticate them into national legislation so that it gives effect to the convention. Then it is also important to have a national maritime security strategy in place. With that, you can have a national maritime security committee. These committees will comprise representatives from various state agencies. They will meet periodically and they look at issues affecting maritime safety and security of their jurisdiction. In Ghana, for example, we have the National Maritime Security Committee comprising agencies like the Navy, National Security, the Ports Authority, other stakeholders, but it's being chaired by the Ghana Maritime Authority. They meet periodically and they look at issues affecting maritime safety and security in the country. It is also important to have training and capacity building. We've always been talking about training and capacity building, but the thing is that do we monitor and evaluate these training and these capacity building programs and to see whether there's the need to go back to them? We always meet every now and then at conferences, workshops, meetings, and talk about training and capacity building. But do we evaluate them? Do we look at the critical areas where we need this training and capacity building? And so we need to emphasize that point. Then there's also the aspect of information sharing and maritime domain awareness. We are aware that recently the IMO has adopted the single windows concept. And so we need to have this common platform where we share information among agencies. And we also need to have a maritime domain awareness in place. We know how sophisticated these maritime safety and security issues have become. Ghana, for example, we have the Vessel Traffic Management Information System, VTMIS, in place, which we use to monitor activities on our water bodies. And so state actors and regional actors can put in place this same system so that we'll be able to enhance our monitoring and surveillance capabilities. Then we also need to have in place technology. You know that armed robbers, IEU fishing activities, we know that pirates and things have become very sophisticated, and so there's a need to adopt technology. We need to look at data analytics. We need to look at IoT devices and to put in place cybersecurity measures so that we'll be able to protect vessels, ports, and other maritime infrastructure against these cyber threats and attacks. Now, we cannot overlook or we cannot ignore the aspect of investment in maritime safety and security infrastructure and services. Most of the time, we rely strongly on foreign investment when it comes to these areas. But it is about time that Africa paid more attention to investment in these areas. We need to at least set aside some budget so that we invest strongly in maritime safety and security infrastructure and services. We know that in recent times, if you look at the IMO Global Integrated Shipping Information System, GSIS, for example, we've had increasing rates of piracy and armed robbery incidents, particularly in the Gulf of Guinea and other regions. Most of them happens at the ports and anchorages. What it means is that we need to have interagency and transnational collaborations to be able to enhance our monitoring and surveillance capabilities. That's one thing that we need to know. Then, most of the state prosecution agencies are not able to arrest and prosecute some of these criminal offenders or these offenders. And so it is important that we enact and amend laws to be able to give these state agencies the powers or the ability to be able to prosecute these criminals whenever they are arrested. Ghana, for example, at the moment we are looking at amending our Criminal and Other Offences Act so that it will be able to give our prosecuting agencies the ability to be able to prosecute the criminals whenever they are actually arrested. Then, last but not the least, we've been talking about cooperation, we're talking about communication, we're talking about coordination. Yesterday, in the IMO Secretary General's remarks, he talked about how member states can show commitment because IMO is already available to support. I think that we need to go beyond the talk. We sit down, we talk about cooperation, communication, collaboration. But then, if you look at the Djibouti Code of Conduct and if you also look at the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, now the objectives of these two codes of conduct emphasize they need to communicate, they need to collaborate, they need to coordinate, and they need to cooperate. But have we looked at whether we are implementing these documents? Now, since 2009, when the Djibouti Code of Conduct actually was adopted, and since 2013, when the Yaoundé Code of Conduct was adopted, have we revised the document? Have we looked at whether we are really implementing these documents? Africa, we are good when it comes to putting things on paper. Okay, we have plans, action plans, but then we don't implement them. We don't go back to see whether they are still relevant. And so I think that we need to go back to and look at these documents so that we implement them. And if there's a need to revise them, we should do that. So to be able to address these maritime safety and security issues in the region, we need to revise the documents that we have and see if there's a need to at least adopt a new one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lati. And now it's come for Vincent Job. It's coming from IMO. And the question is to you, what is the state of implementation of correction action CIPs across the continent? This is coming for the African countries which have been audited by IMSAS. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Stella. Good morning, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. During the presentation on IMSAS, Ero took us through what the IMO member states audit is. The audit is about standards for the implementation and enforcement of IMO instruments to ensure consistency in member states' obligations. Now, he also looked at the framework and the procedure and the non-exhaustive list of obligations. Now, for African continent, we are doing reasonably well. 44 countries are subject to the IMSAS audit. And since this scheme commenced in 2016, 32 audits have been conducted with a number of observations, 597 findings and observations, with an average of about 18.6 shortcomings per audit. Now, 12 audits remain to be carried out, to be planned and scheduled before the end of the first audit cycle, which will be in 2025. 8 of the 12 had already been confirmed. The remaining 4 are in the planning stages. But one thing is clear. Of the 32 audits completed so far, 27 final audit reports have been released and 13 follow-up audits have also been completed. But we find that 24% of findings and observations in the 13 follow-up audits were addressed by the audited African countries, just 24%, through the submission of comments and evidence of corrective action plan implementation. But only 2.5% of the corrective action plans were completed, which is less than 1% of the findings and observations that were signed off. It means a lot still needs to be done about how we deal with our corrective action plans. It is evident that most findings are concentrated in the areas of institutional actions, which is legislation, and associated aspects of implementation policies, guidance, and technical administration instructions for flags, coastal, and port states activities. The presenter discussed all those in depth. Now, when you look at the categories of the root causes, they can be grouped into 4 broad areas. The absence of legislation, policies and procedures, and management and implementation. Now, again, one of the prominent difficulties for the audited member states in the areas of legislation was the lack of national provisions and capacity to promulgate and to keep updated national legislations and internal directives, as well as the lack of assigned responsibility to entities of the state. Those 3 categories of root causes were the most hindering factors for non-effectiveness in the implementation of requirements in the areas of implementation, which is for the flag, the coastal, and the port states, and enforcement for the flag, coastal, and port states. Now, again, IMO stands ready to assist member states and provide them guidance on the implementation of their corrective action plan through the Integrated Technical Cooperation Program. But so we expect that if you need any assistance in implementing your corrective action plan, please feel free to either talk to your peers, countries who's gone through that process within your region, and if you have difficulty, do not hesitate to contact IMO, and we'll be able to help you put up a program to help address some of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. And we've all heard, speaking for IMO, the commitment they are having to assist us as a region. Distinguished participants, given the extensive scope of maritime safety and security in our region, we would have ideally needed a week or more to fully explore these critical issues and develop comprehensive resolutions. However, time is the most limited resource we have, and we must conclude our discussion here. I want to express my deepest, sincere gratitude to all our panelists and the presenters and all of you, the participants, for your invaluable contribution and being able to be here to listen to the presentations. Your insights and expertise have been instrumental in driving forward our collective efforts. Though our time together was brief, the knowledge shared and the connection made here will undoubtedly have a lasting impact. Let us commit to continuing this conversation and collaboration beyond this forum. I mean, this is not the end. It is rather the beginning of communicating to each other. I believe we have networked, exchanged phone numbers, emails, and the likes, so we can work towards implementing the resolution and initiatives discussed here. Thank you for your dedication and commitment to ensuring a safe and more secure maritime environment in our region. Thank you for listening. Presenters, please come to join us for a photo, and then we'll be done.
Yes, thank you again, moderators, our speakers, and our distinguished panelists. Yes, we're just confirming, and I can see the MC coming, about the program. Our intention is to break for tea now. Then we come back we'll give you 30 minutes. Let me see, what time is it now? It's 11:01. So we will come back at 11:30 for session 5, which is about maritime development, trade development,